Today we're going to be discussing the Pentateuch. That is the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, commonly referred to as the books of Moses as well, due to the idea that Moses had actually written them. We're going to be looking at one of the big ideas of the Pentateuch, and that is God through covenant. There are 5 major covenants in the Bible: Edenic, Noahic, Abrahamic, Mosaic, and the New Covenant, which is the New Testament, where we hear the story of Jesus and how he came to save man and save the world. So the first covenant in the Bible, which is found in Genesis 2:15 through 17, is when God makes a covenant relationship with his first created humans, Adam and Eve. God promises to give the world to Adam and Eve and even live in covenant relationship with them. So Adam and Eve and God are all living in the garden together with the animals and the plants in the Garden of Eden, the place where this covenant gets its name, the place where God and man were in relationship, up until the fall. The fall of man was when Satan tempted Eve and she gave in and created the first sin. At this point, the covenant between God, Adam, and Eve was broken, and all the promises that had been made and all the things that had happened between God and Adam and Eve were broken because they chose to sin. They chose to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which God had told them not to eat from. So this covenant takes us through from the fall of man to the story of Cain and Abel up to a man named Noah. Noah was a man after God's own heart, as it says in the Bible. You can find the story of Noah in Genesis 9:8 through 17. God tells Noah that he's going to flood the whole earth and that it is his job to tell all the people of the coming flood and tell all the people what's going to be happening. And so Moses goes around for years talking to all these people, telling them, hey, look, this is what happens. And Noah is building an ark. God gave Noah these specific instructions for building this ark and how it was supposed to be made, how everything was supposed to be done, and gave him specific instructions on how to do everything to prepare for the flood that was going to come. So Noah does everything that God is asking him to do, and then the earth floods. In the Bible, it says 40 days and 40 nights, but there's so many other things that goes along with that, with the times and the dates and the histories, and how long that it actually took for the water to go down. So the flooding ends, and Noah hears from God again, and Noah and God enter into a covenant relationship when God promises Noah that he will never flood the earth again and gives Noah the sign of a rainbow. So after this, we go through Noah and his family, and they begin developing a family and growing a people, and then we come to Genesis 12:1 through 3, which is the time of Abraham and the Abrahamic covenant that God makes with Abraham. Abraham is this amazing man of God. He's an amazing person in the Bible. And Abraham is actually where many religions find their faith, including Islam and Judaism. And so God makes a covenant with Abraham that he is going to multiply his descendants like the stars. He is going to give Abraham descendants upon descendants upon descendants upon descendants. And this is so important because Abraham and Sarah do not have any children. And it's not until they are way, way, way older until they actually have children. And so God makes this promise to Abraham. And so this carries us through to Exodus. It comes through Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob, and then we get to Moses. Moses is a champion in the Old Testament. He leads the people out of Egypt, and he does so many great things under God. So Moses and God enter into a covenant relationship, and this is a key point in the Pentateuch. All the things that are happening have led up to this point in Moses, and all the things that happen after this are leading away from this point of Moses. So Moses is in relationship with God. God calls Moses up onto Mount Sinai and gives him the 10 Commandments and enters into this very special relationship and covenant with Moses. after this, Moses comes back down the mountain and tells the people everything that God has told him, and they get quite the backlash. Moses comes down and they are worshiping idols and they are doing everything under the sun that is not from God. And so Moses comes down and explains to the people that the covenant that God has created with him, and he is not very well received. And so this is the last major covenant in the Old Testament. There's also the Davidic covenant, but that's not considered a major covenant in the Old Testament. And so let's take a look at the New Testament and the story of Jesus and how that relates to these 4 testaments that are in the Old Testament. So a testament is just a covenant with God. They're an interchangeable word. They mean the same thing. So let's look at the Edenic covenant in relationship to the New Testament, or the new covenant that we live in currently with God. So after the fall of man, the covenant that God had made with Adam and Eve was broken. But in the New Testament, God has given us new covenant with his son, Jesus. And so we don't have to live in the fallen covenant of the world. We don't have to live in sin. We don't have to live in that place that Adam and Eve lived in after they broke their covenant with God, because we have been saved through Jesus Christ. And so the New Testament has nullified or taken over that Edenic covenant, that Edenic testament that was created between God and Adam and Eve. The same goes for the Noahic, the Abrahamic, and the Mosaic covenant. The New Testament, the blood of Jesus, covers over all of those things. So in the Noahic Testament, it's the same case, that the covenant that God made with his people through the New Testament covers over the Noahic covenant. It covers over the Old Testament and all of those things. And so, as we look at the laws, as we look at the things that are going on in the Pentateuch, we see some things that may not match up with the things that are going on now. We see laws that are, don't eat meat, don't eat this, don't do this on this day. And because we have the new covenant, because we have a relationship with Jesus, we can see that the new covenant has nulled the old covenants that God have created. That does not make the Old Testament unimportant, or the Pentateuch especially unimportant, but it does show how in relationship through Jesus we are new creations. Because we have a new covenant, because we have a new testament, we don't have to live in those old ways and those laws and in those things that were created for us, but we do get to live in the New Testament, in the new covenant that God has outlined for us.